Atheist professor mocks Jesus Christ. Karoline Leavitt's response left him speechless. Dr. Richard Salinas had built a reputation as the sharpest mind in the university's philosophy department. His lectures were engaging, thought-provoking, and often controversial. But nothing stirred his students more than his stance on religion. Every semester, he would challenge any student of faith, daring them to defend their beliefs against his logic and reason. This year was no different. Religion is the crutch of the weak, he proclaimed to his class of eager students. And Christianity? Nothing more than a fairy tale believed by those who fear the unknown. Who among you dares to prove me wrong? A hushed silence fell over the lecture hall. Most students had seen this play out before. Those who argued against Dr. Salinas always left the debate embarrassed and defeated. Some students exchanged nervous glances, while others looked down, unwilling to meet the professor's gaze. It was a well-rehearsed performance, and the professor always came out victorious. But then a single hand rose. It belonged to Karoline Leavitt, a bright political science student known for her unwavering faith and sharp intellect. She had spent years studying both theology and philosophy, preparing for a moment just like this. The entire lecture hall turned to look at her, some intrigued, others pitying her, assuming she was walking into a trap. Dr. Salinas raised an eyebrow. "Ah, Miss Leavitt, you wish to take on the challenge." His voice was laced with amusement, as though he had already decided the outcome. Chapter 2. The bold stand. Karoline stood up, her confidence unwavering. She could feel the weight of the classroom's eyes on her, the anticipation thick in the air. "I do. But I'm not here to argue philosophy with you, Professor. I'm here to talk about truth." A murmur spread through the classroom. No one had ever approached the professor this way before. Students began shifting in their seats, their interest piqued. Salinas chuckled. "Truth? My dear, truth is subjective. What you call truth is merely belief without evidence. Christianity is full of contradictions and blind faith." Karoline met his gaze. "Is that so? Then let's talk about evidence." The professor smirked. "Evidence? I hope you have more than a few Bible verses." Karoline nodded. "I do. Let's start with history." She stepped forward confidently. Historical records, archaeological discoveries, and first-hand testimonies all validate Jesus Christ's existence. Secular historians such as Tacitus and Josephus documented his life. His resurrection was witnessed by over 500 people. Are you saying all of these sources are false? Chapter 3. The Intellectual Duel. Dr. Salinas leaned back, arms crossed. History is written by the victors. Those accounts were biased, and the supernatural claims defy logic. Miracles? They contradict the very laws of nature. Karoline smiled. "Professor, science itself is built on the idea that new discoveries constantly reshape what we consider natural laws. Quantum physics defies classical logic every day. The resurrection wasn't a contradiction, it was a revelation." A few students nodded in agreement. One raised a hand hesitantly. "Professor, isn't it true that many scientists throughout history were deeply religious? Didn't Newton himself believe in God?" Salinas hesitated before responding. "Belief doesn't equal proof. Faith is emotional, not rational." Karoline stepped closer. "Then let's talk reason. Why did Jesus' disciples, who had nothing to gain, willingly suffer persecution and brutal deaths if they knew their message was a lie? People might die for something they believe is true, but they don't die for something they know is false." A murmur ran through the students. Salinas cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. Chapter 4. The Turning Point. Dr. Salinas sighed. "Miss Leavitt, let's be honest. Religion thrives on emotion, not reason. People believe because they want comfort." Karoline took a deep breath. "And atheism thrives on skepticism, not truth. Professor, if Jesus was a lie, why did his disciples willingly die for him? Why did Christianity explode under persecution? No one dies for something they know is false." Salinas opened his mouth but found no immediate response. The room was silent. For the first time, the professor looked unsure. The once confident smirk had faded, replaced with something else stout. Karoline continued, her voice steady. Faith is not the absence of reason, but the fulfillment of it. You claim Christianity is a fairy tale. But tell me, Professor, if there is no God, what gives your life meaning? What determines right and wrong? The classroom waited, eyes fixed on their once unshakable professor. Finally, after a long pause, Salinas said, morality is subjective. We determine right and wrong based on societal consensus. Karoline shook her head. So, if morality is just societal agreement, then was slavery right when it was accepted? Was genocide justified when entire nations supported it? Without an objective moral standard, anything can be justified. Salinas rubbed his temples. I'll have to think about that. Chapter 5. The Aftermath Dr. Salinas exhaled sharply. You've given me much to think about, Miss Leavitt. A murmur rippled through the students. They had never seen their professor at a loss for words. Some clapped, while others whispered excitedly. Karoline simply smiled. Truth has a way of doing that, Professor. As the class ended, several students approached Karoline, eager to hear more. Though she had stood alone at the beginning, she left the room surrounded by those who wanted to know the truth for themselves. One student, a quiet young man named Jason, walked up to her. I've never believed in God, he admitted, but I want to learn more. Could we talk sometime? Karoline beamed. Of course. Anytime. And as for Dr. Salinas? That night, he found himself opening an old, dusty Bible he hadn't touched in years, his mind filled with questions he never thought he'd ask.